Well, the women's NCAA basketball semifinals will be played tonight in Cleveland. The Final Four pits undefeated South Carolina against gritty underdogs NC State in the early game. The National Player of the Year, Caitlin Clark in Iowa, will be going up against Paige Bueckers UConn. Well, last week's championship rematch between Iowa and LSU drew a record TV audience of more than 12 million viewers, and tickets to tonight's games have been selling for twice as much as the men's Final Four. And tip-off for Game 1 is at 7 p.m. And to help tee up the big game is Ellen Hislop, co-founder of The Gist. Thank you so much for joining us. This is obviously a very exciting time, but let's talk about the hype surrounding this particular tournament and star players like Caitlin Clark. What do you think, this says about the momentum of where women's basketball is heading to right now?
Yes, thanks so much for having me on. And women's basketball really is the moment right now. We saw it really starting in last year's March Madness when the Caitlin Clark effect took place. It was LSU playing against Iowa in March Madness finals of last year. Of course, LSU won that. Fast forward up to this year, Iowa was able to defeat LSU in the Elite Eight with that record $12.3 million viewership. There's a lot of parity in the men's game right now, which means that there's less superstars on the men's side, which means that the superstars on the women's side are able to show up and show out. Caitlin Clark is a generational talent. She is tying records with the likes of Diana Taurasi. She passes the ball like Sue Bird, and she is driving interest in college basketball in the same way that Michael Jordan did. And so it's really fantastic to see her really put women's basketball and women's college hoops back on the map. And as we look forward to the upcoming WNBA season and the draft, she is going to be drafted on April 15th, most likely by the Indiana Fever. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what she does for the growth of the WNBA too.
Yeah, I think you touched upon something important. Whether you're a fan of basketball or even baseball, or if you're not a fan and you don't know much about the sport, but you probably know the name Shohei Ohtani, you've probably heard the name Caitlin Clark. And as you mentioned, these are generational talents. And those kind of talents really drive interest in these sports. So let's talk about the trajectory and where you think things are heading to when you have someone like Caitlin Clark, and we're starting to see more interest in things like women's basketball in the NCAA, but also in the WNBA as well. Where do you think things are heading?
It's only up from here for women's sports. It really is about time. I think when you look at the ecosystem of women's sports and compared to the men's sports side of things, men's sports started decades ago, in some cases a century ago. In comparison to women's sports, the NWSL started in 2013. The WNBA started in the 90s. We have to treat women's sports like the scale-ups they are, and we have to invest in women's sports from the money side of things, from investors, from brands, from media. If we want to see women's sports grow in the same way that men's sports has. Women's sports are growing faster than men's sports right now, and it's because we are finally giving them the attention that they deserve. And because of the democratization of digital media and social media, these women and these leagues and companies like The Gist are actually able to showcase women's sports in a way that traditional media just wasn't beforehand, and people are able to see the product and how good it is on court. But the product's only going to get better from here because young girls and women can finally see that they have an opportunity to get paid to play their favorite sport growing up, which just wasn't the case beforehand. And so from college basketball all the way to the PWHL, what we see right now is really just the surface of women's sports. Within the next 10, 50, 100 years, it's going to completely change and just get so much better.
I think a lot of people will agree with that. Ellen Hislop, co-founder of The Gist, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.